Good afternoon. My name is Kayla West, and today I will present on the intersection of attachment theory and the social problem of emotional neglect in single-parent households. Before I get into the full topic, I just wanted to say that I chose this topic as I have personal experience coming from a single-parent household myself. Many of the things I will mention in this presentation are a small peek into my early childhood life and key factors in my current personality. Growing up, I always knew something wasn't quite right, and through this presentation and many years in my social work journey, I'm beginning to understand not only myself, but also others like myself on a deeper level. This topic is deeply relevant to social work practice because it connects individual child development with systemic and relational factors. Emotional neglect, unlike physical neglect or abuse, can be harder to detect, yet it leaves long-lasting psychological and social impacts. For this presentation, I've drawn on 7 recent peer-reviewed studies, each of which provides empirical evidence that enriches our understanding of the issue. My aim is to show how attachment theory, when combined with other social work frameworks like the family stress model and ecological systems theory, can provide a more complete picture of both cause and interventions. In addition to discussing theory, I will present research evidence that quantifies the prevalence of emotional neglect in single-parent households and connect it directly to attachment disruptions. As one study explains, emotional neglect involves caregiver unresponsiveness to the child's emotional needs and failure to foster emotional development. This definition underscores that neglect is not just about what is done to a child, but also what is not done, particularly in providing consistent emotional support. Throughout the presentation, I will highlight quotes from each article to ensure the evidence base remains visible. This will help link theory to practice and evidence to potential policy solutions. Emotional neglect is a specific form of child maltreatment where a caregiver fails to respond adequately to a child's emotional needs. This can include not providing comfort, failing to listen, or disregarding emotional cues. Unlike physical neglect, emotional neglect can be invisible, occurring without visible injuries or tangible deprivation. According to risk and protective factors for child maltreatment, caregiver unresponsiveness to a child's emotional needs creates developmental conditions associated with anxiety, depression, and poor self-concept. For children in single-parent households, the risk is heightened because the parent often must shoulder all responsibilities without a partner's support, leading to potential emotional gaps. This form of neglect can have a lasting impact on the child's attachment system, shaping the way they relate to others for years to come. For example, childhood emotional abuse and the attachment system notes that emotional maltreatment constitutes serious threats to the child's internal working models of self and others. These internal working models influence how the child perceives relationships, where they expect others to be reliable and emotionally present, or distant and rejecting. In single-parent households, structural stressors such as financial strain, long work hours, and limited social supports can inadvertently contribute to these patterns. Understanding emotional neglect at this level helps us identify interventions aimed at preventing these long-term effects. Sing Single-parent households face unique challenges that can make emotional neglect more likely, even when the parent is loving and committed. Role overload is a common one. Single parents must manage work, household duties, and childcare without a partner to share the load. Financial stress compounds this, often requiring longer work hours that reduce time spent with the child. An ecological analysis of infant neglect by adolescent mothers found that neighborhood poverty and poor maternal health significantly predicted higher rates of neglect. While not every single parent household experiences neglect, the combination of economic strain, time constraints, and limited access to community resources does increase the risk. This is not to say that single parents cannot provide excellent emotional care. Many of them do. However, the risk factors in these households overlap significantly with those associated with neglect in general. The family stress model helps explain this by showing how economic pressure leads to parental emotional distress, which in turn impacts parental quality. The effects of economic hardship reported that economic pressure was associated with harsher and less warm parent behavior. When applying attachment theory here, the takeaway is clear. Consistent emotional responsiveness can be compromised under chronic stress, affecting a child's sense of security and attachment development. Attachment theory, developed by John Bowlby and expanded by Mary Ainsworth, describes how a child's bond with their caregiver shapes their emotional and social development. A secure attachment occurs when caregivers are consistently responsive, creating a safe base for exploration. In contrast, emotional neglect disrupts this process, leading to insecure attachment patterns, either anxious, avoidant, or disorganized. This means children may either cling excessively to caregivers or avoid them altogether in times of need. As childhood emotional abuse and the attachment system state, the absence of consistent, supportive emotional responses disrupts the organization of the attachment system. Such disruptions can have lasting effects into adulthood, impacting relationships, self-esteem, and mental health. In single-parent households, these dynamics can be particularly fragile if the parent's capacity for responsiveness is reduced by stress, work commitments, or lack of support. A parent who is physically present but emotionally unavailable due to exhaustion or preoccupation can still create an insecure attachment environment. This isn't about intent. It's about the consistency of emotional attunement. Children's perceptions of parental emotional neglect and control underscores that children often experience neglect not as occasional lapses, but as a consistent emotional void. This quote illustrates that even small daily absences in responsiveness accumulate to influence the child's long-term attachment styles. The family stress model explains how economic hardship indirectly influences child outcomes by first increasing parental stress, which then impacts parenting behaviors. In households with limited financial resources, parents may be forced into long work hours, shift work, or multiple jobs, leaving less time and energy for emotional connection. The effects of economic hardship found that economic pressure was associated with harsher and less warm parenting behaviors. This means that even without conscious neglect, children may perceive caregivers as emotionally distant or irritable. Over time, these experiences disrupt the secure base central to attachment theory. In single-parent households, financial strain can be even more pronounced, as there is often only one income source and one adult managing expenses. This financial stress is not just a logistical issue. It has emotional and relational consequences. Parents under chronic stress may unintentionally miss cues or fail to provide consistent comfort, leading to insecure attachment patterns. Risk and protective factors for child maltreatment supports this by noting that poverty significantly increases the likelihood of both physical and emotional neglect, particularly when coupled with low social support. This reinforces the point that economic context and attachment are deeply intertwined. Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory provides another lens to understand emotional neglect. It reminds us that the family unit is influenced by broader systems, such as neighborhoods, workplaces, schools, community resources, and policies. In an ecological analysis of infant neglect, researchers found that neighborhood disadvantage and maternal depression increase neglect risk. This suggests that risk factors aren't only within the home, they are embedded in the environment surrounding it. Limited access to quality childcare, unsafe neighborhoods, and lack of community support can all add to a parent's stress and reduce emotional availability for their children. When applying attachment theory alongside ecological systems, we see that a secure attachment requires more than just an emotionally capable parent. It requires an environment that supports the parent's emotional capacity. If a caregiver is living in an unsafe neighborhood with few resources, their focus may be on survival rather than nurturing emotional bonds. This is not an individual failing, it is a systemic issue that impacts micro-level relationships. Single mother parenting and adolescent psychopathology also notes that environmental instability compounds the emotional challenges faced by single mothers, often limiting opportunities for consistent caregiving. This makes the case for both individual and structural interventions. Understanding emotional neglect means listening to children's own perceptions of their caregiving environment. In children's perceptions of parental emotional neglect and control, youth often described feeling abandoned, emotionally isolated, and unrecognized by their caregivers. These subjective experiences are critical because a caregiver might feel they are doing enough, but the child's perception is what shapes attachment patterns. A lack of emotional validation or consistent presence can leave children questioning their worth and lovability, key constructs in attachment theory. This perception-based understanding helps us recognize that neglect is not always about intentional harm. It can be about mismatch between the child's needs and the parent's responses. In single-parent households, a parent might be working multiple jobs, believing they are providing by meeting material needs, while the child experiences emotional absence. Attachment theory tells us that these missed moments of connection can accumulate, influencing the child's ability to form trusting relationships later in life. As childhood emotional abuse and the attachment system notes, attachment injury occurs when the caregiver is persistently unavailable during times of need. This shows why even unintentional neglect matters. While emotional neglect might seem less severe than physical abuse, research shows it can have equally profound effects on a child's development. Attachment theory frames this as a disruption to the child's internal working models, the mental frameworks they use to understand relationships. In Childhood Emotional Abuse and the Attachment System, the author states that emotional maltreatment constitutes serious threats to the child's internal working models of self and others. This means a neglected child may grow up believing they are unworthy of love or that others cannot be trusted. Such beliefs can influence every relationship they form, from friendships to romantic relationships, well into their adulthood. This framing of neglect as attachment trauma emphasizes the need for early detection and interventions. Without corrective emotional experiences, insecure attachment patterns can persist, leading to chronic anxiety, depression, or relationship difficulties. For children in single-parent households, the risk is compounded if the parent lacks emotional support themselves, as they may not be able to buffer the child's distress effectively. Children's perceptions of parental emotional neglect and control notes that neglected youth often internalize feelings of rejection as a core part of their identity. This underscores the point that neglect is not just an absence of care, it is an active force in shaping a child's relational worldview. One important protective factor in single mother households is the involvement of a non-resident father or another consistent male figure. In single mothers, the role of fathers and the risk for child maltreatment, researchers found that non-resident father engagement was associated with lower neglect risk. This suggests that even when the father is not living in the home, his active participation through emotional support, shared caregiving, or regular contact can make a meaningful difference. From an attachment theory perspective, additional consistent caregivers can help ensure that the child experiences emotional responsiveness from at least one adult, supporting a more secure attachment. It's also important to consider that fathers are not the only possible buffers. Grandparents, extended family, and mentors can all serve as attachment figures. When these relationships are stable and emotionally available, they can counterbalance some of the stressors faced by single parents. The key is consistency and attunement to the child's emotional needs. As risk and protective factors for child maltreatment points out, the presence of supportive, emotionally responsive adults outside the immediate household can mitigate the effects of primary caregiver stress. This highlights an intervention opportunity, being strengthening extended support systems for single parent families. Understanding emotional neglect means listening to children's wrong. Attachment theory helps explain the mechanisms of emotional neglect, but we must also look at the broader web of risk and resilience factors. According to risk and protective factors for child maltreatment, risk factors include poverty, parental mental illness, and intimate partner violence, while protective factors include social support, positive parenting, and routines. This means that emotional neglect is rarely the result of a single cause. It is often the product of overlapping stressors. For single parent households, poverty and limited time are common, but protective factors like extended family support or strong school connections can offset some of the risks. From a practice perspective, this underscores the importance of multi-level interventions. We can address risk factors by connecting parents to resources that reduce financial strain or provide mental health support. At the same time, we can strengthen protective factors by fostering parent-child bonding routines and building community support networks. An ecological analysis of infant neglect supports this approach, noting that communities with more accessible resources reported lower neglect rates, even among high-risk families. This aligns well with the attachment theory's focus on consistent, nurturing relationships, showing that relational security can be built even in challenging environments. The consequences of insecure attachment resulting from emotional neglect can be both immediate and long term. Single mother parenting and adolescent psychopathology found that adolescents from single mother households showed higher rates of depressive and anxiety symptoms tied to attachment insecurity. This highlights the way early relational experiences set the stage for mental health outcomes in adolescence and beyond. Without a secure base, children may struggle with emotional regulation, have difficulty trusting others, or develop a persistent sense of unworthiness. These attachment disruptions can also influence academic performance, peer relationships, and risk behaviors. For example, children with avoidant attachment styles may seem independent, but may actually be disengaged from emotional support systems, leaving them vulnerable during crises. Children's perceptions of parental emotional neglect and control points out that youth reporting chronic emotional neglect displays significantly lower self-esteem and social competence. This reinforces that emotional neglect is not a passive condition. It actively shapes the trajectory of a child's development, with attachment theory providing the framework to understand why. While attachment theory provides deep insight into the relational mechanisms of neglect, integrating it with other theories offers a fuller understanding. The family stress model explains how financial pressures erode emotional availability, and the ecological systems theory shows how broader environmental factors contribute to risk. In the effects of economic hardship, researchers emphasize that economic pressure was associated with harsher and less warm parenting behaviors, which complements attachment theory's focus on responsiveness. Together, these theories reveal both the why and the how of emotional neglect. This integration is especially valuable for social workers designing interventions. By combining the attachment lens with systemic perspectives, practitioners can address both the caregiver-child relationship and the external stressors undermining it. An ecological analysis of infant neglect supports this multi-level view, noting that neglect prevention requires both family-level interventions and community-level supports and interventions. This means that strengthening attachment bonds cannot happen in isolation. It must be supported by reducing environmental stressors and providing consistent external resources. From a practice standpoint, applying attachment theory to emotional neglect in single-parent households means prioritizing interventions that improve caregiver responsiveness. This could include parent coaching programs that focus on reading and responding to a child's emotional cues, stress reduction strategies such as connecting families to financial assistance or flexible childcare can also free up emotional bandwidth for parents. As risk and protective factors for child maltreatment states, reducing caregiver stress improves the quality and consistency of emotional care. These strategies target the root causes of attachment disruptions rather than just the symptoms. Another key practice implication is building and maintaining support networks for the parent and child. This might involve mentorship programs, support groups, or increased involvement from non-resident parents and extended family. Single mothers, the role of fathers, found that even minimal but consistent father engagement significantly reduced perceived neglect. This shows a consistent relational presence, even if not daily, can protect against the harmful effects of emotional neglect. For practitioners, this means looking beyond the immediate household to find and strengthen additional sources of secure attachment. Attachment theory is a powerful tool for understanding emotional neglect, but it has its limitations. Critics note that it tends to focus on dyadic relationships and may underplay the role of larger structural forces such as poverty, housing instability, and systemic racism. Without incorporating frameworks like the ecological systems theory or the family stress model, attachment theory risks oversimplifying complex social problems. An ecological analysis of infant neglect warns that exclusive focus on caregiver-child dynamics ignores the significant influence of environmental constraints. This suggests that while attachment is central, it's not the whole story. Additionally, attachment theory can sometimes be misapplied in ways that place undue blame on parents without acknowledging the systemic barriers they face. For single parents, especially those in marginalized communities, these barriers can be significant and enduring. Risk and protective factors for child maltreatment reminds us that addressing systemic inequities is essential for sustainable reduction to neglect. Therefore, the most effective use of attachment theory in practice is in combination with models that address both interpersonal relationships and structural determinants of caregiving capacity. These are the references for all the studies I have cited in this presentation. They include empirical studies and reviews that were all published within the last decade. Each source was selected for its relevance to both emotional neglect and single-parent households, as well as its connection to attachment theory. For example, single mother parenting and adolescent psychopathology provides important prevalence data, while childhood emotional abuse and the attachment system connects directly to attachment theory's core concepts. By combining these sources, my presentation integrates both theoretical and empirical perspectives. These works not only support the points I've made, but also offer a rich base for further research for practice application. As a social worker, staying grounded in evidence-based literature ensures that our interventions are informed, ethical, and effective. This literature also reminds us that the solutions to emotional neglect are not just clinical, they are relational, community-based, and systemic in scope. Thank you for listening to my presentation.